21 members of Buffalo's minority community are supposed to be getting training as plumbers to the Buffalo Affirmative Action Program. But they say that they're not. They say that many of them are not getting any training at all, and now they want something done about it.
Over the past several months, we have experienced frustrating delays in our training cycle, particularly when it comes to OJT, which is on-the-job training. The present program structure does not have a built-in policy for OJT, which means that the union can have 15 to 20 journeymen working on a job site and not have a single trainee. We want some guidelines that will require each contractor to employ a certain number of trainees according to the number of journeymen working on the job in every craft and trade. We are men who have given over 15 months of our lives to this program. We will not quit. As I say again, we will not quit. We will not let the other responsible parties quit. We want an immediate meeting of the task force to rule on our proposal. Until then, we will explore all possible avenues to make the Buffalo Affirmative Action Program work for us, as was the promise in 1971.
I want a meeting immediately with the task force within a week or within 2 weeks. If not, there'll be demonstrations and any kind of thing we can do to get this through for these men to work. They all have families and they have a responsibility to their families. And we didn't go to school for 15 months just to sit down and have 3 guys work. And then when we do go to work, we always wind up doing one specific thing. We're not learning anything on the job.
What do you say to those people who say it doesn't make sense to have trainees working when journeymen are out of work?
When journeymen's out to work, well, you have over 85% of the journeymen back to work today, as of now, are better, you see.
And it's another thing. Out of 500, I think it's 600 journeymen in the union. And the 85% of them are working. And I think it's quite easy to have 21 trainees on a job.
The trainees say they will do whatever is necessary, including demonstrations, to get what they want. This apartment building for the elderly, now under construction at Humboldt in Maine, is a prominent figure in the argument of the trainees. It's at construction projects like this one and the county's new medical health facility that minority trainees are supposed to be learning how to be plumbers. The union people might argue, what sense does it make to have trainees on the job if those already trained are out of work? The trainees reply, if we don't receive this training, we will always be out of work.
The plan is a blueprint of deception on the black community, with a secret society purporting to represent the black community when in fact they were appointed by the governor and not by the black community. The plan presently provides lush employment for a few puppets of Governor Rockefeller, some of whom are grossly incompetent. The plan cannot effectively deal with guaranteeing significant employment for blacks in construction.
Now it appears as though the state expects B.U.I.L.D to beg to continue this plan. This B.U.I.L.D will not do. As we stated in 1970, the moment this plan becomes unworkable, B.U.I.L.D would be the first to say, no go. It appears that this is the case at this time.
The BAAP program had been organized under Governor Nelson Rockefeller, and it continued during the tenure of Governor Malcolm Wilson, who served out Rockefeller's term when he would be the became the Vice President of the United States. But when Governor Hugh Carey took over in 1975, and then much changed during that time. And so I think that it had a lot to do with the change in Albany and the prior relationships built with the Republican governor to this whole affirmative action program also was a notion that was fizzling a little bit. It had been a very expensive funded Rockefeller-esque type of program that I think they wanted the B.U.I.L.D organization out of anyways. B.U.I.L D had had a continuous fight where it had gone into a covenant with the state of New York Department of Labor to provide this assistance, and it had contracts. And so it was a very difficult thing because Bill was accused of mismanaging the money and, I mean, a whole lot of things. So I think those were the initial things, but the geopolitical issue was Rockefeller was out and Hugh Carey was in.
We did not have political connection to Hugh Carey. Arthur Leave was not strongly in support of Bill running the Affirmative Action Program. And he had developed, I think, pretty strong ties to Hugh Carey. And so what happened was there was a commitment made to make the Buffalo Affirmative Action Program broader, to include more protected groups like veterans and women and that sort of thing. And so the program was killed. The program was actually killed, and a new program was promised, and that promise, I don't think, ever really was fulfilled totally.
All the while that the Republicans were in power, the organization had known the BAAP was alive and well. But as soon as Hugh Carey came into power, he gave that program over to R.E. And R.E. quickly formed his own administrative committee, which ran the BAAP, and subsequently the trades walked out because the trades felt that the B.U.I.L.D organization was the only legitimate organization that represented the minority community, and the only organization that they would sit down with and that they would participate with in a training program. And shortly thereafter, the BAAP folded, the Skills Assessment Center folded, and all of the B.U.I.L.D staff were out of the job. You have to remember that the BAAP was able to take an individual out of a pool room, off a street corner, out of a bar, or wherever he congregated, train that individual, test that individual, give that individual, make sure that individual has skill, and then give that individual a union card. That individual didn't have to remain here. He could take that union card and take those skills and go any place in the country, if not the world, and earn a living because he had a skill. He was trained by the Buffalo plant. To take that away and give the individual nothing. What's in place now with that same money? The money's still in place in the governor's, in the Department of Labor budget. Through the 78 restoration. The 78 restoration was born in 1978, right after the program folded, with the funds that was earmarked for the BAAP directed over to 78 restoration. So the funds will always be there, but the trades would have nothing of it. It gave them an opportunity to walk away, and that's just what they did, walk away, and they're still away. There will never be another program like this, not in my lifetime, and not in your lifetime, because as you know, and I know, that one of the most racist institutions in this country are those building trades unions.
of 1978, there were reports about a split in B.U.I.L.D leadership involving the old guard and the young adult leadership caucus. This internal conflict centered primarily around financial issues and secondly around leadership philosophies. The controversy over the 1972 convention pales in comparison because this split would lead up to the eventual demise of the B.U.I.L.D organization.
In my second term, I promised to fulfill the Constitution. During my first term, I had asked the steering committee to follow the Constitution and have a CPA audit. Well, that's what the Constitution called for, an audit. I mean, every organization receiving federal, state, county, city dollars, or for that matter, foundations, any tax-exempt organization, it was required. Our Constitution and bylaws required it. So I promised an audit. I also promised a redress to other internal issues about our management style and things like that. I mean, that was really some of the second term was supposed to provide the delegates of the convention with an audit the next year, show internal reforms, polish up the image of B.U.I.L.D organization. I had hoped to increase the membership. I ran a slate, and when I was voted down in my first term of having an audit, I ran a slate of 32 people, which was part of this this new team, and my team won 28 out of 32 seats. It was a hard-fought convention, and so that created the seeds of a split there, perhaps. But what really fueled the split was the audit, because at that point the board voted by a vote of 28 to 4 to audit, to have a CPA audit, and to address those financial issues.
The beginning of the demise for the B.U.I.L.D organization was when Charlie and the new leaders began to expose the financial difficulties that the organization was having. We had had financial difficulties ever since the organization began, but the old leaders knew that you never allowed anyone to know where your weaknesses were. Well, when they came in, they just made it public knowledge that they were having financial difficulties, and from that point on, the organization began to get weak and got weaker.
People viewed the organization in '78 as an institution. It had been around for a little while, and we were trying to do some things. We were on the verge in those days of having a housing project down where they have Pilgrim Village is on one side, McCarley Gardens, and the B.U.I.L.D organization was building one down on Main Street. We were trying to do things with skate land and the Vermilion Room also. B.U.I.L.D was trying to establish itself. It had done some great things in terms of getting people employed in the community. So it was moving, and there was a perception that the organization was rich, that it had money. It had a bingo game, but it wasn't the B.U.I.L.D organization's bingo game. It was sponsored by a separate organization that donated funds to the B.U.I.L.D organization. I was a staff member in those days of the B.U.I.L.D organization at Skills Assessment Center, and I could tell from the way that people talked around me is that people thought that the organization had something. It had resources, and it had another thing that was going lacking in the black community. It had jobs, or access to jobs. And there was that same element that always rises that thinks that it should go in a different direction, or they should be in charge, or something of that nature. And that's where that, to me, it started. It was people second-guessing the administration of the organization, people getting involved and getting the organization embroiled in things that to me were nonsensical, didn't make sense to be doing when we had other issues that needed to be solved. And that gave them the impression that there was something there to be taken as opposed to something there to be supported.
Not only was it the Constitution that required us to have this audit, but to do the audit, it required the cooperation of the directors of the programs, and those directors were resistant. So therefore, seizure, the board, by its constitutional right, simply went and confiscated all the financial records. We were responsible for them. And mind you, when I became president of the B.U.I.L.D organization, within a month of my presidency, we were hit with a lien on all the B.U.I.L.D organization accounts. And I asked the staff and everyone what was going on, and said we owed taxes. We owed back taxes. We owed thousands of dollars of taxes where we had taken taxes out of payroll taxes, and it never got to the government, or the government assessed us this money. And so this whole getting to the facts, it was very unclear where we were. And so I think that is why it was an order of the steering committee. It was not my order, but the board of directors of the B.U.I.L.D organization, the steering committee, that ordered it based on the constitutional requirement. Yes, we knew there was money in the B.U.I.L.D organization. The bingo games generated about maybe up to $100,000 a year. That's money. The programs ran 3 or 4, I'm not even sure of the total amount of all the programs, but just those we were directly contracting for outreach and recruitment, and the halfway house, the skills assessment center alone, that was a large pot of money, thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that was not a perception, it was a reality that there was a lot of money.
B.U.I.L.D was funded in a number of ways. Their programs were funded through, as you say, the Buffalo Affirmative Action was funded by the state. Other B.U.I.L.D programs were funded by funds donated by 2 main groups, and that was Humboldt and Delavan Community Interest League and TULC, Trade Union Leadership Council. These groups would go out, raise funds through bingo games, through raffles or what means, and donate monies to the organization to help it in its struggle as ongoing costs, to pay bills and to pay salaries. They were members of B.U.I.L.D, but it was not B.U.I.L.D. These were volunteer people, volunteer donations, and this was not understood by those who sought to take over and to bring about the split within the organization.
Although the financial records were seized for the purpose of financial restructuring, it was also said to have been done unbeknownst to Bill Gator, and his name was allegedly removed from the organization's bank accounts. It had also been stated by the new leadership that there had never been an audit in the entire history of the organization. At the same time that this was taking place, Bill Gator, who had been among the most outspoken leaders as president and executive director, tendered his resignation from the B.U.I.L.D organization on May 10th, 1978. It is with deep feelings of mixed emotions that I submit this notice of resignation, effective July 1st, 1978. As I said to you previously, the time has come for me to make a change. Many of the reasons for this decision have already been discussed with you. During the interim between now and July 1st, I stand ready to assist you and the new leadership in B.U.I.L.D in any way possible. Also rest assured that I will always be a B.U.I.L.D member and wish only the best for B.U.I.L.D now and in the future. Originally, Gator said that he would step down officially on the week of July 1st. However, the steering committee moved the date up to the end of that week. This move was felt by many as an attempt to oust him from the organization.
I really believe that after the records were confiscated, there would be a kind of family meeting and an understanding. Mind you, presidents had attempted to fire Bill Gator, such as Richard Ford. Richard tried to fire Bill Gator. But, well, I won't say just Richard, but his steering committee. This steering committee didn't do this to get at Bill Gator, but to carry out the Constitution. And we were surprised when Bill Gator got up and resigned, walked out the organization. Sometimes I tease Bill now that I feel he staged all of that to leave me with the organization. I think he convinced me to. He and Marion convinced me to run for president, put me in the post, and then left me. And the only way he knew how to leave would be to force out. For he used to say, "Power is not conceded without a struggle." No, it was not an effort to oust him, but when he left, and his organization of people left, we weren't about to let him take the B.U.I.L.D. organization items with him. He was the preeminent voice. He was the man who helped make B.U.I.L.D. organization. But when he left, B.U.I.L.D. organization would have to carry on.
You can't have a community-based organization with a clandestine underpinning. You know what I mean? Where you have somebody who, and I'm not making any accusations, but if you aren't open and there are suspicions, then the less open you are, the more expanded the suspicions become. So instead of having reporting methods and standards that agreed with the inquiring parties, people chose to just say, "You mind your business and I'll take care of mine." And in either instance, no business was actually being taken care of.
It was a witch hunt, a large extent, to say that, oh, Mr. Gator is misappropriating funds that weren't not there. So, you know, there can't be any misappropriation. But it's a false perception. So yes, it was. It was an attempt to scar him.
More so than that, I think it was an attempt to find out what was really there. If there was really this money that they had been rumored. And the B.U.I.L.D. organization, I can tell you for a fact, did not have any money. The money that came in is the same thing that comes in today to community-based organizations. It comes in through grants. And basically those grants, you have to do a certain performance to receive the money. It's not a cash kind of a thing. And when they seized the financial records, I think that they went for a surprise. I think they found out that there wasn't the money that they thought was there, and that there wasn't. It was a community-based organization that didn't have the resources that it needed to have. It didn't have the expertise that it needed to have. It may not have been keeping its records the way that they should have been kept. But you got to remember what it was. It was an organization that had just been founded. It was founded. There was no experience to do that kind of thing. There weren't people who went to college to do community organizing in those days, or to set up a community-based organization like the B.U.I.L.D. organization was. The B.U.I.L.D. organization was a prototype. It was ahead of its time. And so when you want to come in and you take a look at someone's books, what you will find is that they did the best that they could with what they had. There was no crime going on. There was no, at least in my opinion, there was nothing, no wrongdoing. It may not have been a perfect record, but I would dare say you can't go into any organization today and find that kind of perfection. It doesn't exist, not even in our own government. And I think if you hold anybody's work up to scrutiny like that, you can find something wrong in anyone's work.
I personally felt that it was time for me to leave the B.U.I.L.D. organization. I didn't see how I could be effective with the new leadership that they had. On top of that, I was tired. I mean, I'd been out there for a good solid 10 or 12 years, and I was very tired. And so it was time to make a change. I hated making a change under the cloud of suspicions and the circumstances and all of that sort of thing. But what happened was that there were a lot of other people in B.U.I.L.D. who decided to leave the organization because I was leaving. And so that's what created a split.
At a B.U.I.L.D. steering committee meeting, no sooner than Gator's resignation, the Juneteenth committee was suspended when they refused to turn over their financial records because it was felt that Juneteenth was a subset of the Community Development Committee and not an entity of the B.U.I.L.D. organization.
This subset of the Community Development Committee, actually, come to think of it, there was a formal committee there was under the authorization of the Community Development Committee. Yes, there was, because I remember the stationery now that said Juneteenth Committee. And Charlie Hartz and his wife and others were involved in that. The Juneteenth Committee was suspended over the issues of who was leaving B.U.I.L.D. and who wasn't. And I think the Juneteenth Committee and Charlie Hartz had stated that he wanted to take the Juneteenth Festival and let it be separate. It was our festival, our founded effort, and we weren't about to let the Juneteenth Festival. We couldn't do anything about the bingo, but we could sure do something about the festival. And so basically we suspended them over the issue, I believe, that you're not going to be an independent entity. You belong to the B.U.I.L.D. organization, the festival does, and so control of the festival was within B.U.I.L.D. organization.
They felt because of the fact that it carried the name B.U.I.L.D. Juneteenth, that it must be part of B.U.I.L.D. and that B.U.I.L.D. controlled it, which was not the case. Even though it carried the name B.U.I.L.D. Juneteenth, it was B.U.I.L.'s Juneteenth. Why? Because everybody came to B.U.I.L.D. to sit down, to plan, and it came about through meetings at B.U.I.L.D. Juneteenth came about. It's not that it was B.U.I.L.'s Juneteenth, it was the community's Juneteenth, which had chose to incorporate as a separate entity as within B.U.I.L.D. As block clubs, churches, and everybody else that belonged to B.U.I.L.D., they had their own identity. They didn't lose their autonomy because they became members of B.U.I.L.D.
Despite the suspension, the Juneteenth 78 festival was to take place as planned, and a new committee would be established later on. But in this continuing story, 8 members of B.U.I.L.D.'s outreach and recruitment staff were fired. Now, if you remember back in March of that year, B.U.I.L.D. was dropped as the representative in the BAAP, and as a result, the staff members had been laid off until a new grant was in place. But they had opted to continue working without a salary.
They were terminated, and they weren't the only staff people that were terminated. In an effort to maintain order, mind you, there were a lot of employees who were talking about, they were walking out with Bill Gator. They didn't remain when he left, they left. They walked out. Their characteristic, their behavior was not appropriate for an employee in good standing. There were public statements made. There were accusations made against the steering committee and me. And at that point, that insubordination issue arose, and they were terminated because of their own activities and actions that were both public and internal, that were not acceptable as standards in our personnel practices of employees.
The police were there to ensure that nothing that's supposed to belong to B.U.I.L.D., the new B.U.I.L.D. as it's so called, left with any of the old B.U.I.L.D. staff, and thereby I don't know what the sense was, because mainly everything that was there, no one was taking, the records were left intact, the office was left intact. The only thing that wasn't intact was people's feelings. It was a lot of hurt because of the fact that I felt that an organization that had worked so hard to fight all the outside elements could be hurt and destroyed from within by its own.
With his days of B.U.I.L.D. behind him, Bill Gator set a new direction for the community by announcing the formation of the Institute for People Enterprises, a non-profit organization designed to provide consulting, training, and operating assistance to various community and business groups. It also consisted of the members of TULC and HADSL, who would later move their bingo games from B.U.I.L.D. to IPE for financial support.
One of the big problems with B.U.I.L.D. was finance all the time. And community organizations, I thought, needed to have some independent financing mechanism. And I thought when I set up the Institute for People Enterprises that would be one of the things that we would work on, is exploring ways that community organizations could raise their own money.
all of a sudden, the bingo monies were going to IPE, and it showed up on Jefferson and High Street, even before that at the Saints Home Church over on West Ferry. Bill Gator's a master organizer, a brilliant activist and strategist. And so it was very impressive. Here's a new direction, not the old 60s grassroots activism, but a new kind of enterprise. And so I was very impressed by it. It was a very capable organization. I wished it had belonged to the B.U.I.L.D. organization. That was the only thing about it. It was $45,000 was the initial estimation of what the debt was. It later was up to about $100-some thousand as we found out that these accounts were being penalized, and the penalties and assessments and interest by the IRS was astronomical. But initially the amount was $45,000 that we discovered. We later, upon further examination, went up much higher.
In August of 1978, a united front was put forth by the members of TULC, HADSL, and the trustee board of the Saints United Church of God in Christ, as they presented petitions calling for an impeachment of Charlie Fisher, charging him with abuse of power and poor leadership. Fisher received a vote of confidence from the B.U.I.L.D. Steering Committee, and the end results would be decided at a delegates' assembly meeting, where charges would be formally presented. If found liable, Fisher would be stripped of his membership as a whole.
I remember it very well. The impeachment call was made by former B.U.I.L.D. employees who had been fired by yours truly and the steering committee. The impeachment was an effort by the heavy artillery that was very loyal to Bill Gator. They had every right to do that. And their efforts were to, look, let's kick Charlie Fisher out and take this organization back over. And probably in an earlier time they would have been able to, but time had advanced and we were solidified, and I had been a very active president. Other than Bill Gator, I'd probably been the most active volunteer elected president that B.U.I.L.D. organization ever had. I had started 3 radio shows. I was all over the community, and so I and my slate of officers proved very formidable. And when the impeachment came up, we were organized, and we out-organized them, perhaps.
The ouster try was unsuccessful. Instead of Charlie Fisher being held responsible, the onus was instead placed on those who presented the petitions. They were ousted on charges of trying to put a stranglehold on the organization by withholding funds, the bingo records. But it was also revealed that they weren't even allowed to present the charges against Fisher. In any event, amid the 5 months of factionalism and infighting, the B.U.I.L.D. organization was never to be the same again. With the organization deeply in debt and the support of the bingo games gone, the new leadership had to seek new methods of fundraising. One method was the B.U.I.L.D. Money-thon.
It wasn't very successful. It was an all-out drive to pay some of these bills. And we went out in different places and sent 40 or 50 people to different churches, block clubs, businesses, bars, wherever, to ask for money for the B.U.I.L.D. organization. We called it the Money-thon because we didn't get a TV station to let us have a telethon. Nobody would give us the time. So what we did is we just said, until further notice, we're out raising money. It probably saved us keeping the lights and gas on a few times.
At B.U.I.L.D.'s 13th annual convention, Charlie Fisher steps down after 2 terms in office as president. But at the same time, he informed the community that although we were approaching a new decade, and it seemed as if blacks were finally on the move, there was still a long way to go.
I wanted B.U.I.L.D. to definitely expand. And I harbored visions of being the executive director, and I joined the workforce as the director of the Skills Assessment Center and as executive director of the B.U.I.L.D. organization. I wanted to do like Bill Gator did and build upon that foundation. And I desired to as executive director, be the CEO and run the thing. Because a volunteer, it's very difficult. Now, I was working for those 2 years as president. I worked with the Retail Merchants Association. So I had a job that was connected to the B.U.I.L.D. organization, but I wasn't a B.U.I.L.D. employee. I saw eventually being able to raise the kind of capital to pay for a full-time executive director. Maybe even get the bingo money back, but we never did. Saul Alinsky and the IAF had planned for 10-year organizations that they were supposed to die off. And they came and asked us, it was, hey, 10 years is up. Bill Gator told him to hit the road. They came back when I took over and said, how about closing down now? And I said no. So we thought that we could expand. The people in this expansion involve what was created was a B.U.I.L.D of Western New York, which B.U.I.L D of Buffalo will still seek to deal with the Buffalo issues. B.U.I.L D of Western New York, we're going to deal with issues from Niagara Falls and Lockport to Olean to Erie.
Succeeding Fisher was L.C. Smith, who had been serving as the business vice president and official spokesman for the B.U.I.L D organization. His goal as president was to have B.U.I.L D concentrate its energy on giving direction to the youth of Buffalo. However, his was a short-lived term, as conflicts with the B.U.I.L D steering committee led up to an ouster from his position at a delegates' assembly meeting. Replacing Smith was an original B.U.I.L D founder and pillar of the Buffalo community, Mrs. Claudia Sims.
He was the 7th of 8 presidents. He was a cab driver. He had been involved in our efforts in YELC and a member of the steering committee. He was our business chair, and he was somebody who really had put us out there. He really raised that issue of Onyx, and he really did some battles. He was a pretty good battler. He became the president of the organization because he had a very strong personality, very aggressive. And where I had been more conciliatory, believe it or not, and he was the hammer and the no-nonsense type of gentleman, and that's what happened. He became the president. He was one of the most active board members, and he ran for president. I think he was encouraged us. He was operating B.U.I.L.D like a president of a small business, without the interaction of board members and all that community stuff. He wasn't a PR man, and he stepped on a lot of toes. He was in a hurry fast, and he made a lot of decisions as president and not with the board. I think that's what fueled that effort. Claudia Sims was one of the community mothers. She remains a community mother. In fact, we just honored her at a convention this year. She was is a very great lady, a kind of Rosa Parks. She was just a strong supporter of B.U.I.L.D, a very elegant, passionate woman who, when she became the 8th president of the B.U.I.L.D organization, succeeding L.C. Smith, she was a mother. She mothered the organization and nurtured it as best she felt she had to. She was one who was one of the originals. She helped raise the money to bring the IAF here before we even knew what we were going to call ourselves. And she was one of the founders of the B.U.I.L.D organization. Even Bill Gator wasn't there in the origin, but she was.
Look at the plants, honey. Don't look at the camera.
Juneteenth is all about?
Supposedly about freedom. It should be a little bit more, but at this point it's a lot better, and I hope it continues to get a little better. I'm sure, in my particular case, I'm going to make it better. I'm going to make any contribution I possibly can to make it better.
Are you enjoying yourself?
Very much.
Coming back next year?
No question. No matter where I might be, and I might be out of town, but I'll still come back.
Boy, that was a tough decision. Jefferson Avenue, the festival was paid. There was nobody giving us any money. The festival derived its income from concessions paid by businesses. And the Jefferson Avenue business people did not want to pay for the concessions. We said, well, okay, if you're going to have a concession out there, you got to pay for it. So we tried to place other businesses who were paying concessions there, and they said, no, this is my establishment. You can't put a concession in front of me. So it came down to how we're going to pay for this daggone thing if you won't let us have concessions. And we never were able to resolve it. And there was Martin Luther King Park and Fillmore Avenue, and the businesses on Fillmore saying, come on, we want you, we need you, come over here. So it was a clear choice between Fillmore and Jefferson.
But from all indications, last weekend's Juneteenth festival was a financial success, which in some ways has made the event suspect. According to officials of B.U.I.L.D, the black community organization which sponsored the festival, profits should run between $10,000 and $15,000, the first profit in the festival's 5-year history. This has given rise to rumors of financial hanky-panky.
Well, I think that's nonsense. I think the fact that this year we had a financial success where in previous years we lost a great deal of money caused some people to suspect that there was money available to be misappropriated.
Cost of the festival, $25,000, but proceeds are still coming in and have already exceeded that amount. Fisher credits the success with the fact that the festival was held in a park rather than along Jefferson Avenue.
I think it was one of the worst decisions I ever made, although I didn't make it by myself, because it should have stayed on Jefferson. Jefferson Avenue was the hub. It had been what was wrong and what had once been what was the best of Buffalo. Jefferson Avenue should have been the place that the festival stayed. And you know, when we moved it, we lost about 15% of the crowd. You know, we still ran up, I think our first year on Fillmore and in the park, somewhere around 80,000 or something. But far from what Juneteenth could have been. We shouldn't have changed. Change like that isn't good. We should have kept it where we should have worked harder to resolve it between the businesses and ourselves.
When Charlie became president, he immediately, I think, wanted to have full control over the organization. So he began to bring in new people for the steering committee. He began to introduce new programs and new policies. And he finally ended up with a group of people who I think Charlie could no longer control. If you're a leader and you're bringing in new people, you have to have some influence over the new people that you're bringing in. And I think Charlie ended up with a whole group of people that he couldn't control, that they began to control him.
"31-year-old Jesse Williams, a former B.U.I.L.D officer and employee, is charged with assault and robbery in the Charlie Fisher beating, along with Jacob Coleman. Police are seeking a third man identified as Walter Davis. Fisher is seen here recuperating today from a rough and tumble attack last night at B.U.I.L.D headquarters. He says he was pistol whipped by 3 men and robbed of company keys and papers. His body today shows the intensity of the struggle.
I think what triggered it was basically jobs. I would not give these 3 people jobs in the organization, and I think that's one aspect. I was made to also write a letter that I would hire Jacob Coleman in one of our programs. And we have in B.U.I.L.D been working very hard, as you know, over the last 2 or 3 years to reorganize the B.U.I.L.D Federation, to restructure it, to bring in professionalism, quality, integrity, character. And it's precisely that lack of those qualities that these people exhibit.
When asked about a reported power struggle within the B.U.I.L.D organization, Charlie Fisher quickly denied it.
So this is external action seeking to sort of make a move now, and they've been unsuccessful.
Fisher says one of the accused, Jesse Williams, is believed to have served time at San Quentin for robbery. Fisher told News 4 Tonight he'll prosecute to the full extent of the law.
I had served my 2 terms as president, and I had served 2 years as executive director. I had been in the B.U.I.L.D organization for 5 years, And to be honest about it, one of the major things was not that my life had been threatened, that I had been beaten up, that the Police Benevolent Association had sued me for $2 million, that I was in financial ruin, but that I had 3 children that I had the responsibility, ages 5, 3, and 2. And I couldn't do any longer the B.U.I.L.D organization and be a good single parent to them. And so I had to make a tough choice. It didn't hurt making this decision by the fact that, my life had been threatened and that, I couldn't get a job. I remember putting my resume out to various companies here, and they look at my name, Charlie Fisher. One threw it away in my face. I had sued a number of companies. I had pursued a number of companies, and so I didn't have an option, and that was a kind of a compelling reason. I lost an election in my lodges when I was trying to become the head of my lodge, and just seemed like a whole series of factors helped me make this decision to relocate to Atlanta, Georgia.
Charlie Fisher was a well-meaning person. He was a young man that I believe had a vision, and he was very charismatic at that time. He could kind of swoop you up and take you along. However, Charlie had some skills that were not quite honed in terms of how to handle himself in certain arenas. He was young, ambitious, that so-called young Turk, and like I said, he was well-meaning. However, in many cases, we see where people gain power and don't know exactly how to handle it. He's a person that I feel has a lot of potential. He had it then, he has it now, but it needs some definition, and I wish him well in his endeavors. At the time, I've seen this happen time and time again, where people start off with good intentions, and once they're in a certain position, those things fall by the wayside, and it becomes a more personalized issue in terms of I need to be the center, where our community cannot afford to have one person as the impetus behind any kind of activity. We need group efforts and teamwork where we empower one another to get the job done.
I think the word ought to go out. How to dismantle and effectively destroy an organization such as B.U.I.L.D, the way that it was done. I think that ought to be a teaching point. This is how to destroy it. This is what it was, and this is how to destroy it. We as a people, I can understand it because I was there. I lived it. I saw people when they thought they had a grip on power. They came in like gangbusters and wanted to clean house. But the pity of it all was that none of them could, again, after they cleaned all of the officers and all of the staff of B.U.I.L.D, we all worked the bingo games. We all sold raffle tickets. We all worked. I mean, it was if you worked at B.U.I.L.D headquarters, you worked at the bingo games. You sold raffle tickets. I mean, this was an unwritten kind of understanding, and that's the way it should be, because a community organization has to survive on something, and you can't depend on programs for your survival, you see. And that's one of the things that happened with the younger leadership, I believe. They depended on those particular programs to sustain the organization, and which it didn't do, because the minute the programs were cut, boom, everything was cut. I mean, they didn't have any home. I mean, how are you going to pay the gas bill, light bill? I mean, you have to have funds. I mean, gas bill, the gas company wants money. I mean, the electric company, the phone company. I mean, it's just. I mean, you can ask for more time, and they'll give you some time, but sooner or later, I mean, these bills have to be paid. And consequently, what happened was, when the folk realized that B.U.I.L.D. as an organization didn't have any money, and I think they turned on each other. I do believe. If you ask them, they will tell you that they literally turned on each other. It was finger pointing time.
You know, those of us who had been in B.U.I.L.D. For a long time would put our own money into the organization. The younger people came along, a lot of them didn't have any money. You know, they certainly didn't have the experience. The idea, the best idea, is to bring your youth in and let your older people train them and prepare them. But that seldom happens, because young people just don't have the patience to work with older people as a group.